Welcome to the Bluestocking Circle podcast, Lady Nerds on Popular Culture. We're your hosts, B,
Grisel,
and Ashley.
This is episode 9, Superman, the Seminar. In today's episode, we will be discussing a selection of Superman stories in honor of his 80th birthday. These stories are Action Comics number 1 from 1938, Superman the Movie from 1978, the 1993 pilot of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, the 1997 episode Brave New Metropolis from Superman the Animated Series, the 2005 to 2008 comic series All-Star Superman, the 2013 Tales of Metropolis animated shorts, and Action Comics number 1000 from 2018. However, all of us have read and seen other Superman stories that may come up in our discussion, so consider this a spoiler warning for the entire 8 decades of Superman canon. Ready?
Ready.
We're here for it.
Up and away! Doom Planet, Desperate Scientists, Last Hope, Kindly Couple. Superman's origin story is so well known that Grant Morrison was able to distill it to these 8 words on the first page of All-Star Superman. The real Superman origin story is perhaps not as well known, but every bit as interesting. 80 years ago, 2 23-year-olds were on the verge of changing the world. They were Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, sons of Jewish immigrants and friends since they had met at their Cleveland, Ohio high school. 6 years earlier, Siegel's father had died during a robbery at his store, an incident that may have inspired Siegel's creation of a bulletproof hero. However, he never publicly made the connection, stating he awoke one night with the idea of Superman and his alter ego Clark Kent fully formed. The character debuted in a self-published January 1933 story called The Reign of the Superman, but was nothing like the big blue Boy Scout of today. Instead, he was a villain set on world domination after being given his powers by a mad scientist. Siegel and Shuster soon rewrote this not-so-Superman, giving him the heroic qualities and alien origin we now know, then spent years trying to sell their new Superman story to newspapers. Finally, their employer, National Comics Publications, currently known as DC Comics, offered to publish a 13-page version in the first issue of their new series Action Comics, dated June 1938. Siegel and Shuster accepted the offer, selling their rights to the character for $130, worth about $2,200 today. In 2012, the check they received, with their names misspelled, would itself be sold for $160,000. Although they were kept on the payroll to write and illustrate Superman comics as part of their contract, they did not receive royalties for the character, and in 1947 they sued DC, beginning what would become a never-ending legal battle. The first Action comic story, titled Superman, Champion of the Oppressed, starred a hero who could not fly, was raised in an orphanage instead of a farm, worked for the Daily Star, not the Planet, and had no problem suspending bad guys from telephone poles. Nonetheless, from the start, the Man of Steel had the steely Lois Lane by his side, masqueraded as mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, and devoted himself to truth and justice, although the American way would emerge later during a wave of patriotism in World War II. At 10 cents apiece, the issue flew off the shelves faster than a speeding bullet. In 2014, one copy sold for over $3 million. This first Superman story ends with the words, "A physical marvel, a mental wonder. Superman is destined to reshape the destiny of a world." 8 decades later, we know that seemingly hyperbolic statement ended up being true. Superman quickly made the leap from Action Comics to the self-titled Superman comics in 1939, then flew to newspapers, radio, film, television, books, Broadway, video games, and almost any medium you can think of, plus likely many that haven't been invented yet. Today we honor the Man of Tomorrow as we celebrate his 80th birthday. Long may Superman reign. Since Superman is so well known, none of us were complete newbies this time around, but Ashley, you were the least familiar with the character of the 3 of us, so tell us your sort of newbie synopsis.
I will try, because we had a lot of homework to do, so to summarize it is a little difficult. But I agree with you when you said that Morrison's one-page summary of his origins was really good because it's so well known. So I will ignore the origin story and we'll start with this. Sent to Earth by his parents to escape the doomed planet Krypton, the infant Kal-El is adopted by kindly strangers and grows up to be Clark Kent, reporter and genuine nice guy. After moving to the big city of Metropolis, getting a job as a reporter for the Daily Planet, finding arch-nemesis Lex Luthor, and falling for star investigative journalist Lois Lane, who may or may not return his affections, Clark must juggle keeping his identity secret and separate while saving the city/world/planet/galaxy on a regular basis. Adventures ensue.
I give you an A. Well done, Ashley.
Nice.
Onwards to our origin stories, and for once, this segment name is super appropriate.
I think we should keep a running count of how many times we can get the word super in this episode. It'll probably be very high.
I super agree. I don't remember the first time I saw Superman, but my mom does, and she has never let me live it down. Apparently, when I was around 4 years old, I saw a commercial for a Superman movie on television, one of the Reeve ones, and I turned to her and pointed and said, "Yo quiero al hombre de la capa." In Spanish, yo quiero has two meanings, I love or I want. So I either told her I love the man in the cape or I want the man in the cape. After that, she had to rent the first Reeve movie for me. So Superman has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. One of my very first memories is of getting caught watching a rerun of the Lois and Clark pilot after my bedtime, and being sent back to bed by my mom, protesting furiously all the way. We've had our ups and downs over the years, but yo todavía quiero al hombre de la capa.
My short answer, I don't remember not knowing Superman. Long answer, I never watched or read any of the things on our syllabus, except Lois and Clark, and my memory was clearly tinged by 8-year-old glasses. Superman was just one of those constants, like Ewoks and talking worms.
Ditto to what Griselle said, and never having watched or read any of the things on her syllabus. I've seen Man of Steel now that I was thinking about it, which is the origin story, like all the other origin stories. And I've known Superman exists in that he is a man who wears blue tights and red underwear and flies around. Just like I've known various other bits about various other cultural lodestones. But I can't remember the first time I ever encountered him. Like, I don't remember my first experience with the man in the cape.
You're welcome.
Thank you. It's been a learning experience for me. Well, first I have a question. How do you pronounce Lex's last name? I always thought it was Luthor. That's how I remember hearing it, like in trailers for Smallville or whatever. But the movie and Lois and Clark both said Luthor. Accent on the second syllable. Does it matter, or is it just a...
I noticed that in the movie. I say Luther.
Luther? Okay.
And I probably said Luther also, but then I thought maybe we had been Berenstein-Baird again.
That's why I wasn't sure. I wanted to get myself...
Was this like the leg?
This is like Leia versus Leo.
Yes.
I want to get the record straight from the beginning, but we can agree that for the purposes of the podcast, it's Luther.
Yes. Bluestocking circle official position.
Got it. Okay.
All right, so then let's go into ship words. And before you say a word, I would like to remind you both that Lois and Clark are my OCP. I love the banter between Lois Lane and Clark Kent, and I think that the Superman-Lois Lane relationship is the most iconic relationship in all of comics history. That being said, what did you think of them? And we can start with any version you prefer.
I actually really like them, especially in Lois and Clark, because it wasn't oh, she's so beautiful, I can't think of anyone else. It was very much, she comes in and he's struck by her, which is fair, but then he starts hearing Perry saying, she's the best investigative reporter I ever have, and then he starts spending time with her. So that kind of admiration / attraction / respect all grows at the same time, and I really appreciate that. And you can tell from the beginning, obviously she's swept away by Superman, because who wouldn't be? This is one of the few times that I will allow someone to fall in love, in quotation marks. You guys can't see it, but I am doing the air quotes, at first sight, because he literally picked her up, swept her off her feet, and flew her back to the office. That's fine. But even Lois and Clark, you can see that they've got that kind of, a pugilistic, I like to antagonize you, and that's how I show my affection kind of thing. So I thought they were actually a very good depiction of the beginning of a strong relationship. I only saw the pilot, so I cannot say anything else that happens in the other 4 seasons, but I kind of liked them.
Ashley, for the record, please confirm that you are not saying this under duress.
I am not. This is my true and unvarnished 100% accurate opinion. The Lois and Clark relationship, the Lois and Clark Superman versions, really I could get behind.
So I like Lois a lot. And I've liked her before in other series as well when she's had cameos. So I always, I knew that was a given. I sometimes don't always like Superman. But I can see it in some instances. I will give you, yes, if you are suddenly struck by this man who will pick you up and fly you away.
Come on, that's
attraction
fair.
will obviously happen. I had some issues though, but most of the issues have to do with the depiction of their relationship. And I get, that you want a slow burn romance in comics because it'll sell more issues, keep this going. But for this, multi-decade romance that you've got going on, it's just so frustrating to see, like, for instance, in Brave New Metropolis, the whole reason why he has his meltdown in this alternate world is because he never told her, and then she dies. But then at the end, she's like, well, maybe we should go have dinner. He's like, oh, aren't you being too forward? I'm like, no! No, she is not being too forward. Like, just get it out. Do this. Get your jollies off, whatever it is. But, like, no more. No, can't do it. As a Batcat person, I get this. It's been 80 years. It's happened. It's been retconned there too. But
it is excruciatingly slow in the comics, but in the TV show Lois and Clark and in the movie, it actually progresses fairly quickly. So I think if you went on forward to the next few episodes and the next sequel.
I heard about this. I have heard about this sequel.
My pet peeve is that it keeps getting retconned. It gets retconned at the end of sequel.
Yes,
Spoiler
it does.
alert.
Which is the thing I have heard about.
In 2011, with the Abomination that was in New 52, their marriage was retconned after approximately 2 decades of happiness. And you can hear my little meltdown about that back in episode 4 of this podcast. I don't know why, because their relationship, when they are committed together, when she's into the secret and she's helping him and being his partner everywhere,
it's really
better. Yes, and you can see that in Superman, Lois and Clark, which is, spoiler alert, going to be one of my reading recs later on. But they work really well as a couple. I don't know why they keep undoing their relationship in all these media.
And the few instances of current continuity that I've read of the Superman line, they do that as well. They work together, they plot. Like, he goes off to do something and she's pretty much reporting on whatever it is he's doing as he's doing it. And then her story's the first one out because he's telling her on the phone what he's doing. So it's really cute. Kind of underhand. Totally not gonna lie there. It works, yeah. I don't know why you would need to diminish her role.
Okay, see, I like that better, the idea that she's in on the secret and they're working together, because kind of one of the things that, it doesn't gross me out, but kind of always throws me for a loop is Superman is lying to her, or Clark Kent is lying to her. And it's weird, because are they 2 separate identities? Is it the same person? And looking at it from an outsider, it's cute because haha, he wants to save her, whatever. Although we can go into how that's super macho, and clearly she can take care of herself and she can help you. So maybe you want to tell her things that way she won't get into trouble, and cause you to have to go in and fly and save her. But anyway, why is it that it's okay for him to lie to her, to manipulate her affections, to say, okay, well, Clark Kent is depending on which one it is, but Clark Kent is the cowardly one, like an action. I know it's 1938, but the action number 1. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to hit him because I want to be a coward. Well, you can stand up for the person that you brought without showing that you're Superman, because being a coward is not the same thing as saying, hey, buddy, back off. She doesn't want you touching me. Like, that got into a lot of, like, consent and, like, women's lib kind of thing, reading that one. So I almost kind of feel like he's cheating. And I'd be really upset if I were her. Like,
I'd be furious.
Yeah, so, like, on the one hand, I like when they're together, but it'd be hard for me, like, trying to imagine myself in her position, kind of moving past, wait a minute, like, this person has been keeping me in the dark and lying for years. Sometimes years, right? Depending on what...
It depends. Some versions, it goes on for a very long time. In the animated series, well into Justice League Unlimited, Superman and Lois Lane are dating, and she still doesn't know he's Clark Kent. And that's the second spin-off series.
And sometimes he'll actively lie to her.
Yes.
Or come up with some ruse in order to make her doubt her own perception.
Gaslighting.
Because she knows, like, yes, he's totally gaslighting her.
This might be a little segue into, I guess, Catharsis Corner, but yeah.
I think this is all catharsis.
But yes, it's that thing where
this whole episode,
instead of the man deciding what's best for the woman, and by doing so causing her to get into more trouble, why can't you just be honest? Isn't open communication the hallmark of any solid relationship? This is what I've been told from Dr. Oz and various other, like, relationship coaches. Yeah. So why couldn't... I feel like there'd be a lot of story there. You know what I mean? The love triangle between Superman and Lois Lane and Clark Kent.
Love triangle for 2.
Yes.
That doesn't do it for me. At least that's not what I like to read about. I'd very much be more interested in, this is a partnership, like Zoe and Wash, the 2 of them working together, or Bat and Cat, if they ever got to, do they know each other?
Yes, they know.
Okay, so yeah, like, I like the
Where are you going with this?
Or like Nick and Nora Charles from The Thin Man. I like the partnership stories, I think, more than the will they, won't they, love triangle stories.
I think we're all in agreement in that regard. Clark, you need to tell Lois you're Superman. But I do want to make a distinction between the pre-Crisis Superman and the post-Crisis Superman. Crisis on Infinite Earths was an event that happened in the DC Comics worlds in the 1980s. Before that, the pre-Crisis era, Superman was a real person, and he was disguised as mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent. We saw that in Action Comics #1 when what you said, Ashley. He says something cowardly, but he's thinking, go Lois, stand up for yourself. He's thinking like Superman, but he's speaking like Clark because Clark is the act. After the crisis event, post-crisis, Clark Kent is the real person. And then Superman is the act. So there's one line in a later episode of Lois and Clark where he says, Clark Kent is who I am, Superman is what I can do. She always falls in love with a real person. When people say that Lois Lane didn't love Clark Kent, well, he wasn't a real person. There was no one to love. He was a complete act and a buffoon. When she fell in love with Superman, it was a real person she was attracted to. So that's the reason I had you to watch these works in that order. You would be exposed to the original pre-crisis Superman first, where he's the real identity, and then to the post-crisis Clark Kent, where Clark Kent is the real identity. You said you had a preference for the Clark Kent is the real person version? That's the Lois and Clark version?
I like that version.
I like that more, especially because to me, that's who he is. I understand he's an alien from Krypton, but he grew up as Clark Kent. He didn't grow up as an alien. So I feel like that gives it a little bit more realism, if realism can be said to be applied to.
Verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude, yes. Verisimilitude to this story. I just think in either pre-crisis or post-crisis, just tell her the truth.
All in agreement here.
I agree.
All right.
It was very frustrating.
I will say, if we're talking about shipping, I like the Lois and Clark partnership, but the Superman Clark Kent of Lois and Clark was my least favorite.
Oh, definitely.
He was smarmy. He knew that he was cute, and he knew that people had things for him. And to me, Clark Kent is a bumbling farm boy who does not realize that he's attractive. He knows that Superman is attractive, but he does not think that he himself has all these attributes. So I like the banter, but I was kind of like, you need to calm down and not know that she's sort of into you, because he could tell from the beginning, and I don't like that. Like, I very much preferred the Margot Kidder, Christopher Reeve, where he does this really great, I almost feel like Gregory Peck bringing up baby Philadelphia story. Cary Grant.
Clark Kent is based on Cary Grant.
Yes, I totally thought that. That very physical kind of in his body but doesn't know how to work his body. That Clark Kent had no idea that he was cute, and he would not understand why Cat Grant would be inviting him to dinner more than once. Lois and Clark totally did. And he was like, I know what you want. No, I like Christopher Reeve. He might be my favorite Superman of all the different Supermans. Superman, sure.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to point out how I think that's the best depiction of a superhero in all of film. Christopher Reeve as Superman versus Clark Kent.
I really liked him. As I was watching this, never seen it at all. Like, there was not a single scene that I had ever seen except for the one where he is like his first flight, I guess. Like, he's just doing his little... I'm doing a wobble from side to side. There's one iconic scene, and that's the only one I had ever seen from this movie. So that's the only image I had of him as Superman. But I really did like him, although I was very thrown by the fact that there were two actors in that movie, and that was confusing to me because I couldn't understand why.
His voice was dubbed over with Christopher Reeve's voice. Did you notice?
It was all very confusing to me, and I was doubting myself because I could rationally tell that these were two separate people, but I couldn't understand why.
Because there's really not a point. Christopher Reeve was young enough that you could have dressed him up.
You could have just dressed him down.
Put in a wig, like the high school age wig and the big, jacket, and he could have been a high schooler.
I was so confused.
Yeah, that threw me. But he was really cute, and he was so young, and he just looked like Superman. I think he won my heart, because I'd never seen it either. And then
he had the red plaid.
He had the red plaid.
Which he seems to have in every comic.
I know.
Because he's a farm boy. Farm boys wear plaid.
It's the thing that signals farm boy.
Yes, it's perfect.
Kansas.
Anything else you want to add about the ship before we move to our next segment?
It is the one true ship. We will not lie.
I'm ending on that, because nothing's going to beat that statement. So let's move on to our feminist rant. Before we start ranting, I would like to take a moment to talk about Lois Lane in general. This isn't only going to be an anti-rant, this is going to be an ode. Lois was my idol growing up. I worshipped the very keyboard she typed on, to the point that my first college major was journalism. Sadly, she has an unfortunate reputation as merely a love interest and a damsel in distress. Her character has indeed been through some real low points over the years, depending on who is writing her. And you need look no further than the title of her own comic series, Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane. Her name isn't even first in the title, and she's defined by her relationship to Superman right from the cover. This series ran from the 1950s to the 1970s, and more often than not depicted her as a lovelorn lunatic whose sole goals were to unmask Superman, so to speak, and marry him, contributing to a harsh and unwarranted reputation that still looms over her today. Nevertheless, despite the dark days she has been through, from the beginning Lois has been depicted as an intelligent, brutally honest, and courageous career woman, defined by her integrity, fearlessness, and strong sense of justice, as we saw in Action Comics #1. She may not have superpowers, but I think Lois Lane is every bit as heroic and inspiring as Superman is. What did you think? And no pressure.
I fell in love with Lois, and I would very happily watch a show all about her. I love her. I love how good she is at her job. I love that she's a brunette. Just a little shout out because I too have dark hair, as we've said before. I think she's great. I really like her relationship with Perry, her relationship with Jimmy. I don't need her to have a man in her life. And going off of that, I don't have any feminist rants about the Margot Kidder version of Lois Lane. I thought she was very well portrayed as someone who has chosen to be a reporter and has decided, she has that thing where she's talking about her sister and she's like, oh, 3 kids.
3 kids, 2 cats, and a mortgage. Ugh.
That one, yes. She has decided, she has made a conscious, rational choice. She doesn't want that right now. Hey, cool, great. One of the things that I didn't love so much about the Terry Hatcher Lois was that whole bit where her sister's like, oh, you drive men away or something, and this is why you're single. She made it seem as if, and then you see Lois in bed watching some kind of really bad soap.
That was so confusing to me because it did not make sense for her character, at least with what they were going for.
Right. And again, I only saw the pilot, but that made it seem as if she actually, not that she doesn't want to be a reporter.
She has regrets or something about her attitude towards people.
Yeah, that she chose to be a reporter because she couldn't get a man. And so she's secretly in love with, oh my God, you want someone to sweep her off? Because the soap that she's watching, the girl's like, this night I'll give you my body or something. That was the worst. Like, it was the worst thing ever. And I was like, why is she?
But like reluctantly, I was like, what is she watching?
And she's crying like she loves it. You can see that she just thinks this is the best thing ever. So again, just based off that little bit, that Lois kind of made it seem as if she wasn't choosing to be a reporter. It was, she had to because she couldn't get a man. Whereas the Margot Kidder was like, bro, I can get a man if I want. I'm just not bothered because I'm too busy running around getting the scoop on things.
I had several issues with Lois and Clark Lois. More so than the others, I would say. And part of it is that scene and that particular moment. But also, I felt like they were doing a thing with her and they were trying to make her the stereotypical strong girl career woman of the 90s. And I get why they wanted to do that, but at the same time, it felt a little too tropey to me. Like, she was a little bit too much of a person with a chip on her shoulder sometimes, and it was like, well, here's this random guy who just came from Kansas, knows absolutely no one, but you're kind of being a jerk to him.
And he's done nothing to you.
And that was like, it kind of grated on me, because I'm thinking, I know what you're doing because you're trying to portray her as being probably extra feminist or, like that single girl in the city and I know what I'm doing. And the feminist in me is like, but you're just mean to people. And I couldn't understand why.
This is a very romantic comedy, especially 1990s rom-com trope.
It is, because it was interesting we were saying about Lois being the very 90s working girl.
Yes.
Especially in comparison to Cat Grant, who was the 90s femme fatale. There has to be a happy medium, because number one, that outfit that she wears when Clark first comes in is not office appropriate.
Do you know what it reminds me of? The Fifth Element.
Yes, Lilo's strappy
what
outfit
are you wearing?
thing. I actually thought of the really horrible Halle Berry Catwoman movie, and I was like, okay, I understand you're a society gossip columnist, but
what are you wearing?
What are you wearing? And I understand what they were doing. It was, okay, you can either be a strong, independent, smart working woman who has no idea of how to dress, or you can be this woman who doesn't use her intelligence, who trades on her looks to get what she wants.
It's playing on the Madonna horror a little too far.
Yes, that really bothered me. I was like, why can't there be a woman who knows that she's attractive and uses it when she wants to, but is also smart? Like, where is the happy medium in between those two?
And it's funny because I was reading The Death of Superman in the lead up to this episode, and Cat Grant has a pretty big role in that. She's dressed perfectly normal in a very conservative business suit that just happens to be hot pink, but it's still, her attire in the comic book is not at all like that.
And I'm okay with hot pink because you're business appropriate, but you're putting your own personal spin on it. That's kind of what I would like to see from a strong female character.
Yes, I have no idea what they were doing with that costume. With those costume choices.
So confusing. I will say that I loved Tales of Metropolis, Lois.
Yes.
And as I'm watching this, I'm going, I know this person. She is on this podcast.
My life's ambition is to be the live action Tales of Metropolis, Lois. You hear that, WB?
Consider this B's audition tape.
Thank you for saying that on the record.
That's what I thought. I was watching this and I was like, I've seen this outfit before. And that hair. I know who this is.
She was extremely persistent.
She was.
I love her. So we've covered the Superman 1978 Lois and the Lois and Clark Lois. How about the Action Comics Lois? What'd you think of her first appearance all the way back in 1938?
Well, that was actually the one that I was most familiar with because I have at least academically explored Superman, and you always need to, know the origin stories and the history behind it and all that. But it's been a while since I had really seen anything more than just a couple of stills, and she is so much a dame of her time, and I kind of loved that because she's got that kind of sassy attitude and her little outfit and the hair, and she's just really cute.
I like that. You can dance with him if you want. I'm leaving. Like, oh, girl, yes. Like, you tell him. I don't think you saw a lot of her in working, right? Like, was there scenes of her at
she alludes
the
to it.
paper?
There's one of her, when he asked her out, it's at the Daily Planet, or the Daily Star, as it was called back then.
Okay. That was the first one I read, so it's been a while. But I actually liked her. There was only 13 pages, but I liked that a lot because I felt like that was another good, strong, that could be a good partnership if he would just tell her how he felt. But I've aired my feelings on that. I did like Action Comic number 1, Lois.
What about number 1000? Let's go to the
Number
present.
1000. That one had so many different versions, but I do love the current incarnation of Lois, and they did play on that particular Lois in several of the Action Comics series.
I was wondering if you'd understand, because Action Comics number 1000 was not very friendly to new Superman fans. It really dove into some complex characters and
There was
storylines.
stuff that was going on, and I kind of understood what I did, and then when I didn't, I was just like,
I'll take it.
It's okay. This is explained. I think because I'm so used to growing up with the Marvel Universe, I'm so used to just things happening and, Deus Machinas and people having powers. You know what? It's fine. Does it make sense? Do I know what's happening? Do I have to know? No, because each one of the stories wrapped up, at the end pretty well.
Stories.
I know it's not Lois related, but I really did like that, speaking of wrapping up, that they went back to
The 1938.
to Butch on the telephone pole, and then
That was my
particular
favorite.
one.
I think that
yes.
was one of my favorites when he was like, this is a time when you could fix your life.
Co-written by Richard Donner, director of the Superman,
Superman.
movie.
I like it. It was like this little perfect little throwback, and then his face because he was really sad when he was talking about being the orphanage. I was like, oh, don't junk your life, fix yourself. I thought it was really cute.
I thought that was really good, yeah.
We're able to infer from the current series that Lois and Clark are married. She knows who he is, and they have a son together. That was a little boy with them.
Yes, I think I understood that
In the first one. It was the first one.
in the
The very
first one.
story.
I
And
wasn't.
also when they have the ice cream cake for him.
I wasn't sure if it was one of those alternate universe
No,
or
it's
a
real-
dream
it's
or
real
something.
continuity now.
Okay, because in
Yeah.
that story I understood they had a kid, but I wasn't sure if that was like actual.
Actual continuity. And I love it. I've protested before several times on this podcast about how female characters are depicted after marriage or motherhood in fiction. So I'd like to counterbalance those protests by saying I think the current Lois Lane is absolutely the way to depict a female character after she's married and or has children.
I think she's really good. I've read several of the other series and cameos between the two of them in other people's books, and I love how they've depicted both their relationship and her being both a mother and a working person.
Have you read Superman Lois and Clark by Dan Jurgens?
I haven't, no, not yet.
It's great. In that series, Lois is the successful author of an investigative journalism book series. And at the same time, she supports her husband's superhero exploits and their young son as he discovers his own superpowers. And the series adorably sprinkles pages here and there of Lois on her laptop typing while her son John plays beside her, or of Clark throwing her a publication party in honor of her new book. It's really cute and a really good depiction of family dynamics, including husband-wife, mother-son, and father-son. So I want to give credit where credit's due. Lois is the exact same person she always has been in that series. She's just a wife and a mother now. She takes John with her to go meet her publisher, on her kidnappings, the usual Lois tasks.
I would expect nothing less of her, to be very honest.
It's great, and I highly recommend that series. And I think the last Lois we haven't talked about is the All-Star Superman Lois.
Apart from her not believing Clark, I like that she had, even when she was wrong, she had a mind of her own and she would go, do her thing. The bit, I forget where it was, but the bit like where she's in the shower and like the panel of
So
her
good,
showering,
Tess.
there was no need for it. But to counterbalance that, her superwoman suit,
Super sidekick.
super sidekick suit, I actually was impressed that they made it look like a standard gymnast leotard. They could have done way worse.
I was also mildly surprised and pleased that it wasn't, one of those strippy, like, cover the nips and that's it type of outfits.
It's funny you to say that because in my copy of All-Star Superman, the end of the book includes some preliminary drawings, and the original sketch for Lois's Superwoman suit actually had pants. It was an exact copy pretty much of his outfit, it just happened to be designed for a woman, and with a broader yellow chest sort of area. But otherwise, they had the same blue tights, same everything else. So the actual costume is actually much more naked than the one that was originally planned.
Oh, so I guess now I'm upset. I
Changes.
take it back.
That changes our perspective.
I take it back. Isn't it funny how context changes? Because when I was expecting, like the really
Power girl.
physics-defying
Yes.
kind of female superhero outfit, I was pleased. And now, why can't you just put the girl in pants? Like, if you're running around, you don't want to get, like chafe marks or like asphalt kicking your thigh and leaving you like all bloodied and bruised. Put her in pants.
Put her in pants, especially someone who spends so much of her time in high places. I'm looking at you, Bruce Timm. That
Yes.
woman was climbing a Lex Luthor statue in the middle of Metropolis with people looking up. That woman should have been wearing pants.
And let's talk about
Their
how
heels.
she was climbing the statue in heels. First of all, how can you climb what seemed to be a vertical face of the statue in heels or not? And then in heels, really?
Gravity defying.
Ugh, sorry.
I also was annoyed by that particular shower scene. And then I couldn't remember if this had been in the comic or if it was just added to the movie version of it. But they took that same scene, and when she's taking her shower, she says to Superman, because she doesn't believe he's Clark, "Are you looking?" And he says, "No, I wouldn't ever look." And she's like, "I would."
That's not in the comic.
That's what I thought, because I watched the movie after I had seen all the other things, and then I was like, have I just started to put them all in into one big mash?
Definitely not in the comic.
I didn't remember it being in the comic, and I kind of liked that instead, because she's like, I would totally look if it was
But
reversed.
see, that's okay because she's taking
It was playful.
and she's giving a little bit more agency to
And they
herself.
added more to the scene. He was off somewhere else, and so she's in the shower, he's off somewhere else, and she was showering for a reason. She had to wash off something. So they added to that scene and made it slightly less weird.
I'll go ahead and say it. I don't actually like the All-Star Superman Lois. I find that giving her the powers was a complete waste. You're telling me that Lois Lane, investigative reporter, would not use her new X-ray vision to go spy on the White House or something and immediately report on the goings-on in there? Instead, they have her sit around flirting with Samson and Atlas, waiting for these men to fight over her, and Superman goes super macho, to quote Ashley, talking about how he's going to win her company and how you can't have my girls, Samson and Atlas. It's incredibly possessive of him. And it really annoys me, that entire storyline of her powers. I love the shots of them on the moon.
That was also better in the animated. When I actually watched the animated, and then I had a discussion with the Superman nerd in my life, I was like, the animated took the graphic novel and made it better. So I would recommend watching the animated version, because even that entire arc of the story completely changed. The Samson thing, they were there, but they were being obnoxious, and Lois was like, I don't no, I have no time for this. And there was real superheroing happening instead of just sit on a rock and flirt in the middle of nowhere.
So, Ashley, you praised Lois Lane in the 1978 version. What'd you think about her blonde counterpart? Let's talk about Miss Teschmacher.
I felt sorry for her. I felt that she was just used by everyone. I hated the sexual assault jokes that they did. I hated that scene where she's the victim and then all the men close around.
Yes, that was so creepy.
It was
and
really
then they
creepy.
were like, what, do something to her chest or something?
Yeah,
and then one guy's like, I'll do
Vigorous
it.
chest massage.
That was,
Right,
yes, that's what he said.
that's what it was.
I was like, it was something about her chest.
And because they say that, and then that's right after that is when the other
They
soldiers
all close in together. It's so creepy.
That gave me a really icky feeling.
It's horrifying. It's sexual assault. It's played completely for laughs.
It's sexual assault, and I don't want to justify anything by saying, the times are different, because that should never have been acceptable. Maybe now with the Me Too movement and today's climate where people are being more open about that, maybe that's why we're also heightened to seeing, to not being okay with seeing it on TV. That really freaked me out. And I felt sorry for her, not just because she gets put in that position by this person who supposedly likes her or whatever. But you can tell that she's smarter than...
Yes, Plan B should have been Plan A.
Who's the other guy?
Otis.
Otis. I was calling him Stan in my head. I don't know why I did that. She's definitely smarter than Otis. So is it that Lex doesn't treat her as a smart one because she's the pretty blonde one and she can't be smart? Because I understand Lex is not anyone's, hero, but that's kind of gross. You could have...
Or he just dismisses her because she's a woman and he assumes she's stupid or something.
Exactly. Either way, not cool. At the very least, Lex Luthor and Lois and Clark, he understands that Dr. Baines she's attractive And she's smart, and he respects her, and that's why he killed her, because he can't have her around as a loose end. Not that that's okay to kill her. But you know what I mean? That kind of, it's gross, because he still kills her, but that attitude towards the female sidekick is a little healthier, I guess, because poor Tessmacher is just, she's just there. Like, no one takes her seriously, no one listens to her, she's used as...
He kills her mother, or he tries to kill her mother.
Yeah, I feel bad for her. Whereas I don't feel bad for Cat Grant. I just don't like her. But Tessmacher, I liked her. I was like, oh,
she wasn't a bad person.
She wasn't a bad person.
Or a weird dresser.
She has my favorite line in the movie. When Lex Luthor asks her what she sees, and she says, cuteness, dimples.
Oh, that was a good line. I do have one slight little ranty rant, and I didn't know where to put this. I think this is a good spot for it. Okay, so, the movie. There's that one scene with Lois's memories or thoughts or whatever is happening there. They're flying.
Read my mind.
And he's reading her mind. Or if he's not reading her mind, she's thinking he's reading her mind. And it's very strange to me.
It is extremely strange. And I know the backstory. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, because I actually looked at it. You tell the storyline because I looked it up because it freaked me out so much that I had to do some IMDbing.
It was supposed to be a musical number, and she kept telling them she couldn't sing, but they insisted on leaving it in there. And then it turns out she couldn't sing, so they had her recite it in prose, what was meant to be a song. They also have a pop version sung by Maureen McGovern. They tried that in the movie as well, but it didn't work well because the voices were too different.
Why would there be a music sequence?
The funny thing is,
the 70s.
I read this online. It's not me. I can't take credit for this, but I thought it was hilarious. This movie set the template for every superhero movie that came after it. Think about it.
Yes, definitely.
So if there had been a musical number in the middle of Superman, there would be a musical number in the middle of every single superhero movie today. Can you imagine
Can you imagine Robert Downey Jr. just like breaking it down in the Iron Man suit?
He
would! I feel like we've missed out on so much.
We have.
And then he and Thor, because Chris Hemsworth would be all over that. So the two of them would have like a buddy like love song to each other.
So it's our loss. But that's the backstory behind that. That's one of those, I'm fast forwarding for the next 3 minutes moments in that movie for me.
It was so weird for me.
It was very weird.
Like moving past that and then the spinning, everything else okay, but those two moments were really weird for me.
Before we leave this segment, I have trivia for you since Ash likes trivia.
I love trivia.
So I asked you two in the Google Doc we're working on, before you looked at the credits, which of these works were written by women? 2 of them were co-written by women. And both of you gave your guesses. I'll reveal the answer now. Unless you've already IMDb'd it, Ashley.
I have not.
Okay.
I was waiting for the moment of truth.
The moment.
You can start, Ashley, as a newbie.
My guesses were the Lois and Clark Lois and the Superman the movie Lois.
Crystal?
My guesses were Lois and Clark Lois and Tales of Metropolis Lois. Because it was so cute, I couldn't think it was written by a man.
The winner is Ashley.
Victory!
Lois and Clark was created by Deborah Joy Levine, a lawyer. And she also wrote the pilot. And then Superman 1978 was written by a whole bunch of people, including Mario Puzo of Godfather fame. But it was co-written by Leslie Newman, who focused on Lois's dialogue. She was a co-writer on the film along with her husband. She said, I identify with Lois Lane because it's possible to be madly in love with a guy and want to settle down and still want to have a career.
I still can't get over the whole Mario Puzo bit.
That was the original writer, and it was extensively rewritten from what I understand. He had a much sillier tone.
Really?
That was later made more serious, yes. It was a 500-page script.
More serious?
All right, so let's go into Catharsis Corner. Get out all those negative feelings you've been hiding. I have some very specific grievances, not about what I selected for this episode, but rather about what I did not select, so you can infer from the omissions. Also, for the record, I believe removing Superman's briefs was a crime against humanity, and no one will convince me otherwise. But thankfully, as of Action Comics number 1000, they're back, so all is well. My main Superman-related grievance is a general one, but we can come back to me later. Please, vent.
So, in many of these works, Clark tries to come out and say, I'm Superman. And nobody believes this man. Why does nobody believe him?
He's too good. He's been too effective at hiding his secret identity.
But I have the same problem too, because especially in the movie, like when you see him, the iconic running and ripping his shirt open, why can't he turn to Lois and be like, shirt rip, I'm Superman? You know what I mean? Why can't he have a transformation in front of her?
In All-Star, he's like, look at me, I'm gonna take your car and fly away. And she's like, I still don't believe you. But you love this man. Why don't you believe him?
But in All-Star, he was already Superman. Wasn't he? Wasn't he already Superman telling her that he's Clark Kent? Why can't he be...
But she loves him and doesn't believe him.
He's lied to her for years. He has robots to impersonate him. Bruce Wayne has stepped in him on multiple occasions. Holograms, you name it.
I think he's done Bruce Wayne too. So.
He's been too effective. He sold the lie too well. Also, you just go with it.
I'll have to. So this was just an observation more than a rant. I feel like I've ranted a bit in this episode. But, so as I was watching Lois and Clark in particular, and looking back also the 1978 movie, I couldn't help but notice the standards by which we hold our superhero bodies nowadays versus even just in the 90s. So you look at Dean Cain, fit guy, obviously, had a background as an athlete. You assume he works out very heavily for this role. But still, by today's standard, he almost looks like a normal guy. Like, he could just be a guy who spends a few hours in the gym every week. And that's okay. Whereas for, like any of the current roles, your Captain America's, your Superman that we must not name because he is the one we do not name.
You have to eat chicken breasts for 6 months and work out 4 hours a day.
Like Wolverine to get, it wasn't Logan, but the one that came before, Days of Future Past. Hugh Jackman went on this weird, starvation dehydration where he wouldn't drink water for days before recording.
Yeah.
That's insane to me. But that's what was expected. Whereas I look at this now, and I know that in the 90s, we were thinking, this is an extreme look for a person because as with most comics, you have, the super stylized bodies as they're drawn, and then you're trying to match these humans to look like these super stylized bodies. He looks like a normal guy. And same thing with Lois, where I'm sure at the time, Terry Hatcher was considered an idealized form of female beauty. But now, what has changed where I think, she just looks like a normal girl. I might run into her on the street.
It was interesting when you were saying that because one of my catharsis bits, and it's more of a confession, I think, is that when I saw Terry Hatcher, and even more when I saw Margot Kidder, my first thoughts were, they're not that pretty. Not that they are not, they are perfectly fine and women, and that shouldn't matter in anyone's reckoning of how good you are at your job or your character, but because, that internalized sense of perfection, female beauty, I'm used to, the female lead and the male lead, but for me it was more the female lead because Christopher Reeve is beautiful. I expect them to be supermodels. So when I saw these average women, my first thought was, that's interesting. I wonder why they cast that instead of being like, oh, okay, cool. They're just women. They're cast because they're good at their jobs. And that kind of gave me a whole little what am I? Who am I? Because I try to think that I'm, progressive thinking and forward thinking and a feminist, but it's so weird to think how ingrained these ideas of culture, these cultural standards of beauty get entrenched within us.
And it's funny you two are saying they look very normal because the whole weight gain muscle training program isn't new for current heroes. Christopher Reeve had to put on over 30 pounds of muscle before he started filming, and his trainer was, trivia fact, David Prowse.
Oh, shut up! I didn't know that.
He wanted to be Superman, but he was British, so they didn't let him.
Oh.
Instead, he trained Christopher Reeve to have that body.
I mean, David Prowse has his moments, but okay, I like the Star Wars connection. That is cool.
So even back then, they weren't considered fit enough or muscular enough to meet these standards. It's just that our standards have gotten so exaggerated over the years, as you're pointing out.
You can't just lift some weights now. You have to take some steroids.
And not drink water.
Yeah.
For 2 weeks.
Is that it? Is that all you two are ranting about?
I mean, I feel like I've done a lot of ranting throughout. So these are...
In that case, I have time for my big grievance, and I'd like to point out, both of you just said this thing that I'm about to complain about.
I'm sorry.
Before the recording.
I'm sorry.
Every single time my entire life that I've said Superman is my favorite superhero, I hear the exact same thing. Superman, he's so boring. Superman is not boring if you take a second to look beyond the surface. His challenges aren't usually physical like those of many superheroes, but they're rather psychological and philosophical like we saw in these works. And I find this so much more interesting than who's punching who the hardest. Superman's dilemma is not can, since he almost always can, it's should. Should he stop the East Coast missile like he promised Miss Teschmacher or the West Coast one to save Lois's life? Should he stop the Crown of War from destroying Smallville or be with his father during the last seconds before Jonathan dies? Should he tell the people he loves who he really is, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, or should he protect his secret identity to protect them, or so he thinks? I don't understand how any of these questions are boring. And not to mention, can you imagine living with the ability to hear everyone's cries for help all the time and know that you can only help a small portion of those people, plus try to live your own life? Being a new farm boy in a big city with a new job is difficult enough without having to go through all these different trials and tribulations he has to go through every day. How do you not buckle under that kind of pressure and guilt? And yet he does it, and he does it with a sunny disposition, in the versions that I like anyway, and I love him.
Okay, I did say, I don't think I said he was boring. I said he was not as interesting.
You said he was boring.
Okay.
Direct quote.
Okay, fine. But I will say he was not as boring as I expected him to be. I did not have high expectations because I always thought Superman was boring. I don't think it's that he's boring. It's just that I found the other characters to be much more interesting. And maybe that's because I know so much about the origin, and especially since we were doing a lot of like origin or very specific story arcs. Maybe I spent more time with Superman, like developing any one particular story. I'd be more interested because I do understand where he's coming from, and I do appreciate the struggles that you're going through. And no, if I could hear everybody, I'd be like, ha, check me into a mental hospital because I can't deal with it. Like, put me in a room with padded walls, that way I don't hear. Well, no, it wouldn't help, would it? Padded walls wouldn't stop.
No.
Oh,
Lead.
Poor Superman.
It has to be lead.
Lead, you're right. Vision. I did know that. Yes.
Maybe not lead.
No, they don't do anything for his ears, as far as I know.
Oh.
He just has to go to Pluto,
hang
out there for a while.
With the kryptonite.
Okay, so I feel bad for him. I just didn't think he was as interesting as the other characters.
That's a good point. He has an amazing supporting cast of characters.
So I have been one of those people.
Yes, you have.
I have, but not for the reason you think. So for me, it's not so much that he as a character is boring. I just don't find it as interesting when a character has superpowers. So I have the same problem with the Marvel movies, where I prefer a character who is human and has to make up for that. So, for instance, I would rather watch a Captain America who's been superpowered by science than like a Vision movie or something, although that doesn't exist. But, you know what I mean. I prefer the characters who have to make up for their frailty and their lack of strength in some other way. So I have the same problem with Wonder Woman. I would love to love Wonder Woman, but I don't. And I have read her books. And I find them boring because, again, she's a goddess and she's superpowered. For instance, I do read and enjoy Trinity, and I do read and enjoy Injustice, although that's a whole other kind of Superman. But I like the character in conjunction with other characters and, working together to solve a crime, or, having a cameo in, like, one of the Batman series, or having a cameo in, like, the Super Son series. So I prefer him in his involvement with other characters, but when it focuses solely on him, because he does have all these advantages, that's what I find a little bit like, well, he's gonna save the day anyhow. So, unless something major is happening to deter him, I never believe he's in danger, and I never believe he won't win the day. So I don't find it as compelling for that reason. Same thing with Wonder Woman.
That's fair. I can see that. If that's your viewpoint, then I think that's a fair reason for calling Superman boring.
And as Clark, I like him more. And I haven't read the entire series. I've only read little bits and pieces of the current run of Action Comics and Superman, mostly because they've been tie-ins to others. So I've read those, and I do like this current Clark, who is a Clark from somewhere else who is now in our world, and comes with Lois and John, and I like the family dynamic. I like him as a father. I like him as a husband, and I like him as just a person in general, so I will give you that.
I find him fascinating as Clark Kent, as you pointed out, and I also love his relationships with, as Ashley said, his cast of characters. I think that's what makes it so interesting to me. It's how he works with the people around him. Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts before we move into our sock ratings?
Nope, I think we're good.
Then let's go. We covered a lot of works this time around, so instead of giving a sock rating for each one, let's give an overall Superman sock rating and say which of the works was our favorite. And Ashley, as the appointed newbie, let's start with you.
I'll give it a 3.5 socks. Because entertaining, I don't know that I'm led to really delve deep into the 80 years, but I'm glad that I watched it, and there are some things I want to read more about Lois Lane. I'd actually be interested to watch the animated version of All-Star Superman.
I recommend it.
Can I give it a 3.75?
If you do that, I'm rounding up to 4.
Fine, 3.5. So I actually really liked a lot of different things from a lot of the different works. I liked Christopher Reeve as Superman. I liked the Lois from Lois and Clark. But overall, I think I'm going to give it to All-Star Superman. I really enjoyed the attention to detail in drawing Clark Kent and Superman differently. That kind of thinking about how he would hold himself, how he would carry his weight, his clothes. The arcs were entertaining, especially Superman dying. I didn't think that was a thing that he could do. And I liked Lex Luthor being like a maniac, but just really leaning into I'm a maniac. And I feel like being a maniac because being a maniac is fun. So I think All-Star Superman.
Did you notice he was CEO Lex Luthor, not middle management Lex Luthor, like certain Darths I could mention?
Griselle, I'm not going to dignify that with a response. Which one was your favorite? We're going to move right on.
So, Moving on. I have to give it to the 1978 movie. I really liked it. I was surprised. It was very silly, but apparently could have been sillier, so good for that, I guess. I did not like All-Star very much, but I really enjoyed the animated version, so it's kind of a tie between the animated version of All-Star Superman and the film. So we'll call that a tie. Overall, I would also give it about a 3.5. I am inspired to read a few more things, and because I did enjoy Lois, I did go out and seek other Lois-related content, so there's that.
I'm going to give it overall a 4.5 out of 5 stocks. And my favorite of these works, and I remind everyone, my favorite, not the best, is Lois and Clark. On to our reading
That was
Rex.
super hilarious.
With 80 years of works to choose from, it's impossible to provide a full list of recommended Superman stories, so I'm going to make a suggestion or two for each work we discussed today, aimed at those of you who are newish to Superman like Ashley and Grisel are. For Action Comics number 1 and 1000, I recommend, again, the 8-issue 2015 comic series Superman, Lois and Clark, written by Dan Jurgens. Current Superman comics have gotten quite a bit convoluted lately due to several cross-title events, but this series focuses specifically on Lois, Clark, and their son John as they navigate the new DC world, and so serves as an excellent introduction to newer storylines. For the 1978 Superman movie, I'm going to give the obvious recommendation, the 1980 sequel, Superman 2. There are 2 versions of this movie, the theatrical version directed by Richard Lester, who replaced the first movie's director, Richard Donner, following a fallout with the producers, and also what is referred to as the Donner Cut, which was released in 2006 and completes Donner's original vision. I prefer the Donner Cut since I think Lois is much more active in that one, but be aware it is unfinished, so it includes preliminary footage such as screen tests. If you prefer a more polished version, you might want to watch the theatrical version instead. For the Lois and Clark pilot, I recommend the entire first season of that show. After the first season, the creator, Deborah Joy Levine, was dismissed, along with a whole bunch of other people, including Cat Grant and First Jimmy. The show was retooled and eventually went off the rails, but if you like the goofiness of this version, keep going. In addition, a few years ago, I learned there was a tie-in novel for the series, Lois and Clark, a Superman novel by C.J. Cherie. It's not easy to find anymore, but if you want more of this Lois and Clark, it's worth the effort. Be aware, though, that it has very little of either the rom or the com that define the series, focusing instead on the more realistic aspects of reporting. I will also recommend the first season of the current TV series Supergirl, which is a lot like Lois and Clark. That show was also retooled extensively after its first season, and they don't have much in common anymore. However, the Supergirl Superman does show up in later seasons, and he's wonderful and worth the wait. For the animated selections, I recommend the full Superman the Animated Series, and its follow-up series Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, which form the definitive DC universe for me. I also recommend the 1940s Fleischer Studios Superman cartoons, short films in which Superman and Lois made their first big screen appearance. For All-Star Superman, I recommend another graphic novel, Superman Birthright by Mark Waid, which collects the 2003 to 2004 series and is my favorite of the approximately 10 billion recent attempts to modernize Superman's origin story. Lastly, Lois and Clark gave me a lifelong love of journalism stories, so I will also suggest the 1974 book All the President's Men by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, as well as the film adaptation and the follow-up book The Final Days, both from 1976. All these works demonstrate the real power of truth, justice, and the American Fourth Estate. In a similar vein, albeit fictional, I recommend the 1979 movie The China Syndrome, a thriller about a reporter who demonstrates Lois Lane's best qualities. Finally, I very strongly recommend you make Perry White proud and subscribe to your favorite newspaper today.
So I've already mentioned this, but I will mention it again. I love Super Sons. Sadly, its run is ending. It's being redone as like some sort of young adult graphic novel series of some sort. The details are still kind of fuzzy. Several of the recent rebirthed younger people storylines are being redone for a young adult series. So Super Sons is ending, but it's nice to know that it will have a beginning, middle, and end. So that is my recommendation. For anybody who loves Superman or who just wants a fun story, you do not need to know anything at all about Superman in order to follow this series. It's really fun. It is my happy story. It's a monthly. It will make you laugh. It is just cute. It's a feel-good type of book. Now, another more recent, since I did mention that I like crossovers, Tom King's Super Friends arcs in issues 36 and 37 of Batman, where Superman and Batman go out on a date night with Lois and Catwoman, and funny stuff ensues. It's really cute. It's very well done. and it reveals aspects of both of these couples' relationships, which I think is also very well done. And also for both Clois and Batcat-ish moments, there was one very short run in New 52 Batman/Superman that I liked. And this was issues 13 through 15. It involves, I believe, it's been a while since I've read it, but it's like a demon creature. He comes and he throws off the timelines and sends them to an alternate universe. So things happen. It had some really good artwork, and the story was interesting. It involves mistaken identities, confusion over who's who, but it ends up with a lot of Catwoman and Lois saving the day, and it was fun.
I don't think I can add much to the conversation vis-a-vis superheroes. Number one, because it's not really my thing. Like, I'm not a big superhero person. Number two, because your recommendations were really, really well thought out and detailed and extensive. So I'm going to switch it a little bit. And if you like the whole trope of secret identity and falling in love with someone even though you don't think that you like them, or you're not sure that you like their alternate ego because you don't know it's their alternate ego, I would recommend Crown Duel by Sherwood Smith. It was originally 2 books, Crown Duel and Court Duel. It's now published as an omnibus, and magic and kind of fantasy, so not so much sci-fi, but the 2 leads fit very nicely, I think, into the tough and determined female who's stubborn and thinks she's right even when she's not, and the quiet, behind the scenes, trying to make the world a better place and trying to deal with his steely lady love pattern that Lois and Clark have demonstrated so aptly for us.
That sounds great, Ashley. I'm going to go run over and read it.
It's really entertaining.
Lastly, I'll point out that over on Twitter, we have been recommending a Superman story every day in the lead up to this episode, which we've collected as a moment. So find us there at Bluestock Circle for additional recommendations. And if you want even more superhero-related recommendations, ask us. This episode is just the first in the Bluestocking Circle's Summer of Superheroes, so we'll be happy to talk superheroes with you all season long. That concludes this episode of the Bluestocking Circle podcast. For the show notes, visit thebluestockingcircle.com. Find us on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, and pretty much everywhere at Blue Sock Circle. That's Blue, S-O-X, Circle. Email us at thebluestockingcircle@gmail.com and join the conversation. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and now Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe to help us grow.
Cheers!
If you take a second to look beyond the surface, his challenges are usually not physical like those of many superheroes.
You gotta look beyond his briefs.
That's it. This episode has devolved.
It has.
To an entire conversation on what's in Superman's briefs.
They've been arguing about this for months.
We've got our subheading. Superman, a seminar. Look beyond the briefs.
Beyond.
Look beneath the briefs.
Look, I just want to say that Superman
We're all adults here.
is a great example of the female gaze.
Oh, yeah.
He was not
definitely.
walking around as a male power symbol. That's how it was for us ladies.